Hi, everyone. Welcome to RSA Conference 2021. This is Lessons Drawn from Cybersecurity and the Rise of Privacy Tech. We'll start with speaker introductions and then do some background information and baseline definitions in privacy and security before we dig deeper into the transferable lessons in cybersecurity and then wrap up. I'm Lourdes Turecha. I'm the founder of the Rise of Privacy Tech. Our mission is to fuel privacy innovation. We do this by bridging the tech capital expertise gaps in privacy tech and bringing together founders, investors, and experts in this very nascent privacy tech landscape. In my individual capacity, I advise and consult with some cybersecurity startups and privacy tech startups. And I'm also an adjunct professor and fellow at Santa Clara Law, where I teach an experiential course, Privacy and Technology, where my students work with 4 very exciting privacy tech startups. In my past work lives, I worked at a cybersecurity startup, or not startup anymore, company, Palo Alto Networks, on privacy, and also worked in big law with a portfolio of more than 100 clients on everything privacy from GDPR to incident response and WannaCry, not Petya. With me today are 2 amazing veterans in privacy and cybersecurity, Michelle Dennedy and Melanie Ensign. Nikki?
Hi, everyone. Michelle Dennedy here. I am trained as an attorney, so I come at it from that side of the house. I was the chief privacy officer at a lot of the big infrastructure companies, Sun, Oracle, McAfee, Intel, Cisco, and then dove off into the world of Startuplandia. And I am currently acting as the CEO of a stealth privacy company for the developer community, as well as a consulting practice called Privatus, where we deal with wicked privacy and all of its complexity.
Thanks, Mickey. Melanie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie Ensign. I am the founder and CEO of Discernible. We are a specialized communications consulting firm dedicated specifically to security, privacy, and risk organizations. So everything from incident response to application security, bug bounty programs, various privacy issues, as well as product development, guidance, and things like that, particularly in terms of how do you communicate about security and privacy to consumers and to stakeholders who are not domain experts. So everything from website copy to in-app copy, in product experiences and things like that. So we are specifically focused on helping security and privacy organizations operationalize more effectively and to become better communicators themselves. And in my personal capacity, I lead the press department for DEF CON, which many of you probably know. It is the world's largest hacker conference. So I have spent the last 15 or so years working in security and privacy at some big companies, earned a few battle scars along the way, convinced me to try entrepreneurship, and now I'm helping both large and small companies with their security and privacy communication needs.
Thank you for that, Mel. I think we should just dig deep into, get into the definitions, right? So 2 very distinct domains, privacy and security, but they do intersect. How do you ladies think about these two domains separately and where they intersect? Mel?
You want to start with security? It's big.
So I'll start just from a communications perspective. I have to simultaneously see them as the same and different. And that is because of the way that various stakeholders think about these issues. So a lot of consumers and a lot of regulators and government officials see security and privacy, as well as other elements of safety, as being just multiple sides of the same coin, or sometimes even equivalent concepts, particularly when we're talking about them in the abstract sense, right? Like online safety kind of encompasses all of those things in terms of the experience and expectations that you have when you are interacting online with a company or other individuals. And so from that perspective, I have to be mindful that there is, an entire very large population of the world that sees them as one and the same in the way that they talk about them and their expectations. However, internally within an organization, we have to think about them differently in order to operationalize them appropriately. We need dedicated teams focused on security. We need dedicated teams focused exclusively on privacy. We need teams that are looking at things like anti-abuse and other forms of safety. And we actually need them to be specialized and focused on those areas, but then come together and work collaboratively to create a holistic and safe experience for consumers. And so I have to think, like I said, simultaneously along both of those tracks. But as experts, when we are working on these problems, we have to be able to separate them. Otherwise, we can't ensure that each perspective is getting its due diligence and the dedicated thought process that it really deserves and needs.
See, there's a reason for the communicator who went first. Because it takes
I'm setting the tone, Michelle. Now you may follow.
It's good. And I think it's so important to get that tone and to understand in any sort of development, since this is, the RSAC crowd, you break down those elements. So get the contextual picture, as Mel has said. There's an output of fairness, of treating human beings with respect, of the human rights aspect of privacy, which is, every one of us has an individual story, online, offline, and long after we're gone, our stories are the thing that endures. And so the integrity of that through line is privacy, I think, the content. Now, that said, that sounds like either it's impossible because the surveillance capitalist society is here to spy on us and the Borg is real and are we in the matrix, are we not, blah, blah, blah. If you start to freak out and say there's security versus privacy, and you start to define it as security is the lockdown of certain categories, of certain subsets, of certain jurisdictions of data, you start to play this whack-a-mole game. When you bring it all together again and you say, privacy, if you look at it through the user story, as you're looking at an architectural flow diagram or activity diagram, as privacy is really the authorized, and that is throughout its life cycle, imagine that policy sticking to your story, the authorized processing of personally identifiable or personal data according to moral, ethical, legal, and sustainable principles. And this is where security comes back in, because morality is a decision of, should we be safe? When should we be safe? Who should be allowed in? Ethics are your brand. This is why you hire Discernible. What is your story? What is your preference? How much should I trust you with what kind of sensitive information or storyline? Legal is usually the first thing that you reach to, and you see a cadre of privacy lawyers out there talking about legal. They need more Lourdes as their professors to say it's an experiential thing. It's not starting with what are the limitations and what can I get away with? What's the minimum viable legal thing that I can do today? And then finally, sustainability, I think, is this something that your brand wants to continue contributing to? You don't run up and get compliant with GDPR. Is this a topic or is this a type of output that's going to be valuable? If you're a bank, I'm assuming you want that depositor to put in more deposits or different variety of types of deposits, or as they get more and more affluent, put more and more capital into your bank. All of that output goes into that stack of what is authorized, what information is personally identifiable and personal, and then how do we apply these principles? So design it, if you can imagine, I'm waving my arms around as if it was a flow diagram. And so when we're talking about the technical, the personal, and the storyline in front of that, you're constantly looking across that soft system and saying, where do humans interact with machines? Where does policy and expectation live? And then how do you run that system as a symphony together rather than one or two beeping instruments going off and playing their own tune? So it's a long-winded answer, but I think the getting down to brass tacks about what is security, how are we operationalizing that? What is privacy? How are we operationalizing that? And importantly, what substance are we using to glue these capabilities together?
That was such an elegant way to explain that distinction making. I love that framework that you've shared with us. None of the usual boring, privacy is just security, privacy is dead, security is better than privacy or whatnot, or privacy. Exactly. So I do appreciate that, the elegant explanation that you so kindly shared with us. So let's dig deep then into what is privacy tech. And full disclosure, at the Rise of Privacy Tech, we are doing that work this year of defining the landscape with these ladies as members of the working group, and looking at then first defining what privacy tech is, and then categorizing the different startups in this space. If we look at cybersecurity, it's such a mature landscape, right? Like you have your firewalls, your virtual firewalls, your endpoints, your network, your cloud security, your container security. And so what is privacy tech then? I'd love to hear about, I know you've done this work already, but I'd love to hear, I'd love to have you share with the audience what you think of as privacy tech.
I'll kick us off on this one. I think it will stick to my activity flow diagram and architectural. If you look at the players in the marketplace self-identifying as privacy tech today, most of them are in the legal category. Mm-hmm. What have we been spending on to become or remain compliant with the big sticker shock of GDPR, LGPD, and all the California SHISA? And there's more stuff coming, right? So it's like, we knew for the last 20, 25 years, we were supposed to be doing something outside in commercial world. In the government, they were supposed to be doing stuff for the last 70 years. Now there's a big fine, your customers, it's going to have some of that sustainability impact. So most of the privacy tech that you're seeing today is automating things that lawyers buy, services. They buy reporting services, tracking services, and metrics. So we're on a desperate hunt for metrics. Where's my data? What is it doing? I think the overall landscape, you should think about privacy tech as a wide open blue ocean of innovation if you cover that whole spectrum of what is authorization and how does it stick to micro stories that people are telling with more and more and more capabilities for surveillance. That doesn't mean privacy goes away. That means, come on in, little innovator. Your problem just got more delicious and more impactful and more important. What's processing? Oh gosh, we've been in a pandemic for the last year. No one should be saying anything about we might get into cloud. You're in the cloud, baby. So how does that alter? And what are the tools that we have to apply to that storyline? And then how are we actually tracking and marking that we're using this data efficiently? The old-fashioned marketing, I don't even know what a tome or I think a fallacy was that everyone knows that 50% of marketing is wasted. We just don't know which 50%. And I think that story has to go away in this age of massive data. And you have to figure out what are the tools we need to understand what we're collecting. Are we collecting it in our own best interests? Are we collecting it from the user story of the individual whose story is being kept or held in fiduciary care? And why? Like, don't be afraid to ask the question, why do we have all this crap? And how do we get rid of it when we don't need it?
Thanks, Mickey. Mel?
Yeah, this is why I went first on the first question. Following Michelle just sucks.
But
the one thing that I will say, and I mean, truthfully, I'm not as generous as Mickey with some of the inclusiveness, I guess, in terms of how I think about privacy tech, because I think a lot of those legal workflow technologies aren't actually enabling or improving privacy. It is a workflow technology that could just as easily be applied to any other legal requirement that needs to be tracked and measured. And so what I really focus on is, where is the technology that is actually raising the bar? The technology that is actually putting privacy first in terms of why it exists, right? We have a lot of workflow solutions that exist because laws exist. I'm looking for technology that exists to enable privacy, that its primary purpose for being in the market is actually to protect personally identifiable or personal data, or to give people more control over their data. And so, when I think about what's actually privacy tech, and the reason I'm so specific and somewhat exclusive is because I really want to fuel that innovation. And I really want to help elevate those companies that are doing something different. We've had automated workflow software for a gazillion years. We just now have new laws that we apply it to. And so what I'm really excited about in terms of privacy tech is, Mickey, like you said, those innovators that are coming in and actually solving new problems, where they're not just putting a privacy sticker on, orchestration software that's existed for 20 years, but actually focused on what can we build that makes privacy better, that makes it more accessible, that makes it easier for people to use, and that actually enables, the safe processing of data, the safe analytics of data, and being able to do something different. And it's one of the things that, when we even just talk about innovation, the word innovation almost has no meaning at this point, because anything people launch, they're like, this was so innovative. We changed the font color, and now you have 17 new boxes that you have to check in order to get any type of privacy from this new feature that we've lost. Like, that is not privacy tech, and it's not innovation. So I look specifically for the technologies that are changing the way that we operate businesses, changing the way that consumers interact with technology, and changing the control and choice that consumers have over their data.
I love this so much. And it's like if we were in a real room together, it'd be so good, because just these two women together, I don't think people recognize how innovative that thinking is, Melanie. Like, she's an innovator.
So depressing. It's so depressing. So depressing that this is not common sense.
Exciting? It's not common sense. Exactly. Because you're 100% right. And I think, I don't know how many technological slaps to the head we need to recognize here we are. I mean, the internet, the commercialization from about 1995 onward of the internet itself should have been a technological wake-up call, calling for international treaties. We did this once with piracy in the 1500s. Our laws have not caught up for the internet up to the speed of 1500 shipping laws. Folks, innovation needs to happen there. Right. From a technological perspective, we've tried to play this cat and mouse with stickers, saying, "Oh, here's some privacy for you. Oh, hey, guess what? We have a transparency law. OMG, you can send an email and get a log dump." That is not privacy. That is not control. Consenting to things over which you have zero control is not privacy. It's a shell game. So the real innovation, I think, the good news and the bad news. The good news is there's a lot of room for true innovation and fresh thinking here. The bad news is, and we'll get into, I'm sure, with Lourdes, is where's the market? Who's going to be the buyer of this new tech? Because with the advent of quantum, and it's not just the buzzword of quantum computing, and it's not just big data, and it's not just analytics, it's truly every piece of silica that is in the data centers today will be replaced in the next 7 to 10 years, simply because things are going to have to get cooler. Things are going to have to be more efficient. We're going to have more and more people on the grid, on the electrical grid, as well as on the compute grid. And we are so dependent as humanity upon data for our day-to-day lives. So our commerce has changed, our culture has changed, our governments are changing. And so the data stories that rise up from the 7 billion souls running around on the planet at any given time are demanding a change. And that sounds very ooey gooey fooey, but the reality is, when you have the texture of a qubit and you're able to simultaneously process much larger chunks of data, can you imagine walking up to that data center and going, "Hi, my password is QWERTY123. Tell me everything you know." It's not going to work that way. So we have to start thinking it more as, like the ancient physicians did. At first, you just had an external body. And then they started looking inside and saying, "Oh, there's different pieces here. And then, oh, they do different things in here. every single piece of your virtual data center needs to be upgraded. How you're doing consent management, how you're doing proportionality control, what you're storing, how you're sharing it, with whom you're sharing it, under what conditions. All of those questions are operational questions. Some of them will be automated. Others will become so boring and rote that we can use things like MLAI to extend at least their reach, if not their efficacy, and really thinking through on an executive level, what is this worth? What is the asset? If we can do this for currency exchange, we can do it for data stories. But we just simply have to invest in the technology, and you have to let go of this fantasy that somehow we're going to like reveal the data centers of the Facebooks and the Amazons of the world, and suddenly we're going to be healed. We're going to be terrified when we actually see what's going on under the covers. But it's not too late. That's the exciting thing for a real innovator is you run into the fire. You don't run away from it.
And there's so much fire to address right now in privacy tech. Just bringing it all together, it sounds like this, at the highest level, privacy tech is the term that we've been using to label this new tools and startups that are solving for privacy problems. May they be the workflow automation, compliance, privacy, data protection type of problems. May they be the processing, data analytics, data mapping, DSARS type of problems. And then you have the B2B versus B2C distinction that Melanie was alluding to earlier. Are you really solving for privacy, individual privacy problems? And we are seeing some B2C type of startups address that, even though the B2B space is way ahead B2C right now. And then I guess, you have the legal stuff, the compliance stuff, the mapping, and Mickey, beyond, and then there's the security, right? There's the overlap between cybersecurity and privacy, where there are some tools in the security space that have great use cases for privacy, homomorphic encryption, and those sorts of things. Mickey and Melanie, what are other areas, what are other categories that you're most excited about? And I particularly want to talk about shifting left when it comes to privacy and what that looks like for developers, given the people that are listening to us today.
Yeah, this is a softball caught. So I have a small bias that is a massive bias, is that I'm really focused on developer tools. And I don't just mean the current people who are code jockeys or DevOps people who are implementing things, or quality people, or even architects. I mean, when I say developers, please think expansively and please include your privacy officers, even if they're legal people and they are intimidated by technology. Bring them into the room and think about the development from the scoping workshop. So if you think about early on in compute, before you put any code into production, there was quite a bit of thinking about what were the business rules, what were the goals and the outcomes, what was a failure, and then you designed accordingly, because you had, the punch cards, you kind of had a one-shot thing, or it was going to be weeks and weeks or years and years in the future. Now we're grabbing stuff off Stack Overflows, sticking them in and hoping that the Twinkie lights go on, because we're making these innovative moves saying, oh, Twinkie light turned blue, rather than saying, does this piece of data have integrity throughout its life cycle? So, and is it proofed from bad guys touching it? And bad guys can be lazy guys who let it hang out, or negligent people who let it hang out. So how are you doing that security kernel around that privacy thing? But then also, should you? That's the big, hard question with privacy tech. Should you have that data? So building that gateway into your scoping workshops, figuring out how does it actually go through your code development, so that at the end of this, you should have your hand raised saying, I have data, so that your mapping technologies can catch it and say, aha, now I can do mapping, instead of saying, yo, Mel, you got any data? And why don't you fill it into this wizard here and we'll pretend that's real. We have metadata. Why aren't we reading the metadata for our mapping? Hello. And if you're putting more data into the system and you're enabling that to happen, that's the time to put those markers in there. So that's what we're working on at my stealth software company right now, is how do we have tools to repeatedly do a better job of actually building code, checking code, making sure it has quality, and making sure it has that hand up saying, pick me, I'm the data you're looking for.
And that's one of those lessons that, we saw in the past few years in security, right? That let's build security early on, not just tack it later. And it's certainly true for privacy. And that's one of those things that we are trying to implement in the privacy tech space early on with startups like Mickey. Mel, are there other areas that you're most excited about in categories in this space?
So similar to Mickey, I'm really excited about the technologies that enable us to do better from the beginning in terms of building things better. I'm excited to see capabilities where, you can actually scan the entire history of your code base, not just current code, but the entire history of it, understand the patterns, get it to self-identify that it's touching personal information, and then being able to actually automate those the workflows once you actually know what's happening with the data, right? Like you can loop in whichever stakeholders and teams you need to, but being able to actually identify like which tools are exposing. Do you have an API that's exposing PII? Most companies don't know the answer to that question. It should be very simple, and it's the type of thing that is technically written into laws, but it's nobody's really doing it, and so it just kind of flies under the radar. So being able to actually understand what the code is doing, and being able to anticipate how the code will react before you push it into production, right? Like that has immense security benefits. It has immense privacy benefits. Random programmers who've been at your company for a couple of weeks should not be making, material changes to your authentication systems. And, especially if it's connected to, personal data or, customer data. In being able to actually have that visibility. And the reason why these tools are so exciting to me is because the programmers or the traditional developer teams don't actually have to get involved. You don't have to disrupt their workflow. You don't have to try to force another tool onto them. This is just something that arms the privacy and security experts with all of the visibility and information that they need. And then whatever, cultural, relationship, organizational, product changes need to be made, you can have that conversation in the right way. I have a client that I've been working with where, I'm so excited to see the fact that their number one kind of mantra is don't give the developers more stuff. Giving them one more tool, giving them one more step in the process is, just setting yourselves up to fail. And so similar to Mickey, I'm really excited about the things that it's not just moving things left, but actually putting security and privacy at the beginning of the process, not just further left than we've been, but at the very, origin of code being written. But again, I also have to agree with Mickey that the big, I think, elephant in the room from both the technical perspective and the ethical and kind of regulatory perspective is, should we have this data to begin with? And that's something that, at least in the United States, our privacy laws have fallen very, very short of. We've known in security for a very long time that you don't have to protect stuff you don't have. And we have yet to really adopt that as an ethos on the privacy side to say, we don't actually need to have all these different ways for people to access and delete their data if it's data we shouldn't have in the first place.
So thanks, Mel. So we talked about shifting left as one of the lessons, both in privacy and security, that we've drawn from cybersecurity and can apply in privacy tech. I do want us to dig into the comms and PR lessons that, Mel, you've worked with, in the cybersecurity space for more than a decade. So what are some of these lessons that you are imparting to your privacy tech clients, given privacy tech is such a nascent space?
Sure. So there's three key things that I look at that we learned the hard way from the security experience, and that we're trying to impart to privacy tech so they don't have to learn it the hard way. The first is earning credibility, right? Talking points do not equal trust. Having a laundry list of user controls buried somewhere in your app does not mean that you are going to earn public trust. It is a great talking point for a regulator to say, hey, look at all these things that we've built. But if it's not actually part of the user experience, if the user doesn't understand the context as they're using your product or service in terms of what's happening with their data in real time, or what things are being used for when they're asked for consent is a whole nother problem in terms of how we ask for it and what we use it for. But earning credibility as a privacy tech company is crucial because you have to walk the walk. You can't sell privacy if you yourself suck at privacy. The second thing is to embrace accountability. And this is true for both privacy tech startups, but as well as large companies that are trying to get better at privacies. You need to learn how to apologize and actually mean it. That is something that a lot of companies struggle with, where they may recognize that now is the moment for an apology, but they don't mean it, in which case your apology actually, people can tell when it's a fake apology. And so the second piece of that is to actually, once you issue an apology, to actually change. Right? Make the changes that people are asking you for. And for startups, they're very fortunate that they don't have decades of legacy systems and, years and years of executive personality precedent that they're going to have to clean up after. You can start now to do this better. We have lots and lots of case studies from, companies who have gone before. There's no reason to be repeating history. You can actually avoid those landmines. So you're not issuing as many apologies as your predecessors. And then the third thing is to actually advance the field. And I don't just mean advance the field in terms of your technological advancement or capabilities. That comes with the territory of what you're building as an entrepreneur. What I'm really talking about here is elevating the profession and the industry from a marketing and comms and PR perspective. We as communicators need to hold ourselves to a pretty high standard in terms of what we are willing to say on behalf of an organization. I read some of the statements in the news from various spokespeople, and I'm just flabbergasted that they can sleep at night because they're either lying through their teeth or they're dumb as rocks and don't understand that their own company is lying to them. And so, that is really important, that we're not just elevating the technical capabilities that are advancing in privacy, but that we are looking at our profession as communicators to say, how can we hold ourselves to a higher ethical standard? How can we hold our organizations to a higher standard and help them see around the corner and avoid those problems in the first place?
Walking the privacy talk is certainly one of the main messages that we share with startups that we work with at the Rise of Privacy Tech and come to us. So thank you for that message, Mel. Mickey, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear about your perspective and how the privacy tech landscape can do better when it comes to selling or marketing privacy products. So we see CISOs budgets and they're just 10, 12, 20 times more than privacy officers' budgets. How are we going to fuel the privacy tech landscape when there's this huge discrepancy in budget? What are some of the lessons that you think the privacy profession and the privacy tech startups who are selling can draw from cybersecurity here?
Yeah, I think one of the things, particularly since this is RSAC, we're mostly getting people that at least care about security, if not, embedded in the security world. And if you are a privacy person who's wandered here and you're not embedded, get embedded and get embedded fast, because it's not a 10x. My last corporate gig, it was an 80 to 1 ratio of my budget to security budget. So you can collect with abandon. You can have 165 different countries that you've got to be in simultaneous compliance, and yet you have a Band-Aid. So you're going to have to figure out, how do we leverage the CISO's budgets to make sure that their goals are achieved. And remember, there's 11 other things that privacy people are caring about: proportionality, minimization, transfer, and the security aspect is one of 11. But it's a really important 11th element of fair processing to get that data secured. So to the extent you can make the case, if you're a privacy person, that this relates to and elevates the goal and the perspective and the insight for the CISO, it's a mutual win. So this is where looking at wicked methodologies and wicked problem solving looks at almost infinite complexity and stakeholders. And so if you approach security or privacy as a problem to be solved, you will never have enough budget. You will never have enough people. You will never have enough skill. If you instead look at this as, think about it as a sloping curve to optimal. You're starting here at ad hoc, always the most expensive. Now you're competing a land war of like, can I get $1 to analyze this law versus can I get a firewall? Once you start to figure out, I'm now pointing that firewall in front of my most secure assets. Which ones need to be secured? It used to be IP, and I used to be an IP litigator. Your CISO may not really understand the value of what IP is. You know, losing a $7 million patent case is nothing compared to a $7 billion privacy fine. So it's not a tit for tat. Figuring out what your data is and where your data is critical for privacy. So data mapping technologies probably will help your AppSec people with app control. It probably will make their reporting more efficient for how are we keeping out the bad guys, reducing incidents, making sure we have the coverage that we need to continue our cyber insurance. The privacy person now has leverage. So you've got to really take this sort of this integrated approach and make sure that everybody is not sort of like patting the head and doing the favor of giving the privacy person some budget, which has been the practice over the last 20 years of tin cup favors. No, this is an integrated approach where everyone is elevating the data assets of the company. You're protecting risk. Yes, sure, great, use all those combat metaphors, but what you're really doing is inviting in asset value and tangible access to have leverage and controls over that data so that your consumers can control more, your governance people can control more, your reporting is more, has a higher level of integrity, and everybody wins. So make sure if you're a privacy person, I know you don't have budget, pick everybody else's pockets. If you're a security or tech person, this is not just a tech solution. It's a wicked problem. It's an integrated management soft systems problem. Figure out your soft system weaknesses and vulns, and then get together collectively. And I guarantee you that little privacy person that's been asking for favors is going to do you a big one.
I love the last point because it leads us to the other point that we don't have a lot of time to, we have a minute to discuss. So getting embedded just gets us to the point of bridging gaps and collaborating because of the cross-functional nature of privacy, right? So it's not, you can't do everything on your own as a privacy professional, and privacy tech founders need to understand that you're not just selling to the lawyers, or you might be selling to the data analytics team or the DevOps team or this GRC security professional. I do want to give us some time to wrap up. So from my end, thank you everyone for listening in. You can find the Rise of Privacy Tech online on Twitter and LinkedIn at Privacy Tech Rise, or our website, riseofprivacytech.com. If you're a founder, investor, or expert in the privacy tech space, please come to us. We have a great event coming up on June 23 at the Rise of Privacy Tech Virtual Summit. Come join us, and we'd love to have you there. Mickey, Mel, any wrap up closing words?
The last thing I'll say is that for any privacy or security professional, your most important skill that you can develop is the ability to influence. You've got to get people who don't report to you to do the thing that you need them to do.
Amen.
Yeah, and I'll stop where Mel's profession begins, is be a storyteller. Understand why you're in the room. Understand what your objectives are. This is not a war. It's not a competition. You're not going to like save your job so that a CISO loses his. Forget about all of that. This is the absolute bit flip of data as asset. Data is your currency. Protect it like you would your very own dollars, and you're going to do really well.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to maybe seeing you next year live in person.
Hope so.
Exactly.